and it's also been conducted through the Teams platform as well. So can I ask you please to turn off your microphones and cameras? And before we begin, I'd like to ask Councillor Finlay Stewart to lead us in prayer. Thank you, Councillor Stewart.
Gracious God, as we come before you once again on this day, we come as always giving thanks for this day and for another day on mercy's ground. And we pray, O Lord, that you would bless us here together, that you would be with us in all that's decided and deliberated on, and that you would give us, O Lord, wisdom as we debate these matters before us. We give thanks, Lord, for the opportunity of meeting here and representing these islands, the people of these islands. We pray, O Lord, that you would bless the Chief Executive and his staff, the convener and the leader, the director here with us, and the chair of this group, that you would be with him also. And Lord, we ask that you would go before us and lead us, guide us, help us and strengthen us along the way. We give thanks for Jesus, and we give thanks for his finished work on the cross, and that we would all look to him at all times and in all situations that are before us, both here and in our own lives and our own private lives. So we ask, O Lord, again, that you would bless us and be with us, that you would go before us, that you would forgive us again, O Lord, for our many sins and shortcomings and failings, even on this day, and have mercy on us in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Just go through the usual housekeeping in terms of how the meeting will be conducted. If you are attending remotely and you're a member of the committee, please leave your camera on and your mic off. If you're an officer, please leave both off unless you're speaking to an item or answering a question. I will call on the relevant officer to present the report. If a member or officer wishes to ask a question or raise a point, please do so in the chamber by pressing the central button on your microphone or by using the raise your hand function remotely. The microphones in the chamber operate a queuing system. 3 microphones plus the chair are live at all times, indicated by the red light. A flashing green light indicates a mic next in line to go live, and a solid green indicates a mic is in the queue to go live. Committee members will be given priority, and I will invite each member in the queue to speak, and those with a raised hand attending remotely. After you have spoken, please ensure that your mic is turned off in the chamber, or lower your hand and put your mic off if attending remotely. Those attending remotely, please ensure your device is positioned so that your image is clear, and other participants, and please speak clearly and concisely directly at the camera. When calling for agreement of the recommendations at each item, you may do so by voice in the chamber and by a no show of raised hand remotely. In regard to declarations of interest, members are reminded of the protocol. In the chamber, you must leave the meeting and sit in the members' area, or by ending the call remotely. And following consideration of the item, you will be invited back into the meeting by the bell, if we had one, in the chamber, or by the moderator if remotely. Please ensure you are available to accept the invite to rejoin. Finally, a reminder that the meeting has been live streamed and recorded. Recording has been made available on the Corners website following the meeting. Now, we have 2 presentations today. John Cunningham will present on Scotland. On behalf of the committee, I welcome Charlie Main from the Seas of the Outer Hebrides project at Lewis Castle College, UHI, who will take us through a short presentation on the project and its development to date. Some of us have already had the opportunity to see that presentation, and it's very interesting, and members should look forward to that. Now, before I move to the agenda items, I would like to touch on some of the discussions at the Crofting Cross-Party Group meeting, which took place last week, which I attended along with Councillor John Norman MacLeod and Murdo Mackay. A lot of mutual issues of interest were discussed at that meeting, and not least the disappointment of the cross-party committee at the lack of any crofting bill in the government's programme for government this year. So there was strong feelings about that. Also discussed was access to crofts, the Crofting Commission, and also the grey lag geese scheme too. And the committee has decided to ask the Rural Affairs Cabinet Secretary to attend the next cross-party group to raise concerns about those issues and to discuss them. Also raised was the various grant schemes, and been highlighted recently the difficulties for many applicants in accessing grant funding through various streams being made available. And we raised this too at the JCC last week, the committee last Friday. And I think we want to, with your agreement, to make representations again on our own behalf to the cabinet secretary about those concerns. There's a body of evidence growing that there is a great deal of difficulty and obstacles being put in the way of applicants when they apply for grants. And we want to raise that concern with the Minister. She is already aware of it, but we want to reiterate our strong concerns about that as well. So that's just a short update on that meeting. We also had a presentation from the Crofting Commission from Lynn McMillan and Karen McRae, and we also had a presentation from the Crofting Federation, and we look forward. It was a very interesting, enjoyable meeting, and we look forward to working with both organisations going forward. And in discussion with the director, we have agreed that we will host a seminar later this year to discuss some of the issues that were highlighted at the meeting. So thank you for your patience there. We'll now move on to the formal agenda, and the first item is the minutes of the meeting of the 16th of June this year. That's for your approval. Thank you. Item 2 is declaration of interests. Members are asked to declare any interests they have in any items of the agenda. It would be helpful if members express why they are declaring an interest in the item concerned. Members in the chamber, please do so by pressing your microphone on or through Teams by using the raise hand function. Please ensure the declaration is repeated prior to the relevant item and you adhere to the protocol as previously indicated. We're now going to move on to the item 3 in the presentation, the Marine Protected Area Management and Monitoring Seas of the Outer Hebrides project. And there's a report by Mr. McPhee, the Head of Economic Development and Planning. And Joe's going to speak to the introductory report, and then I'm going to invite Charlie to give her presentation. There'll be an opportunity for questions and answers following the presentation. Mr. McPhee.
Thank you, Chair. As members can see, the Marine Protected Areas Management and Monitoring Seas of the Outer Hebrides project. Critical to the project is how can this benefit the people, communities and the environment of the Outer Hebrides, and how can it ensure that the people and the communities are put at the heart of that process. So looking forward to Charlie's presentation, and very happy to pass over to her and then maybe to pick up at the end if there's any questions and anything arising from the presentation and the Q&A. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Joe. Welcome, Charlie, and in your own time.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me along today. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Okay, we'll have a go at this. Are you able to see the slide in full?
Not in full, no.
Okay, hang on a minute. I'll just do that again, and I'll just do that one.
Members do have the presentation on SharePoint anyway, so we can. Okay.
All right. Well, I've shared again. Okay. Well, can you see adequately now?
Yes, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. Okay. Yeah. So thanks for that introduction, and thanks for inviting me along today. My name's Charlie. And I run the Seas of the Outer Hebrides project, which is obviously part of the MARPAN programme of work, which does have some EU funding. I've called my presentation today, How Could MPAs Complement Sustainable Development in the Outer Hebrides? So this is what I'm going to say. I'm going to try and give a bit of context and mention why the Seas of the Outer Hebrides project is needed, why I think our natural assets are important, and then touch on a couple of interesting UK case study examples, which is the approach we're taking at the moment with stakeholders is to pull out some examples and try and stimulate discussion by looking at those examples. And I'll close up by saying a bit more about what we're doing specifically on the CESO project. So just a bit of context. So this map is a map of all the boundaries of the designated sites, marine designated sites in the Outer Hebrides, marine protected areas or MPAs, just a general term that we're using to refer to all the different types of marine designations, of which there are a few. And of course, they are designed to conserve or recover our nationally important species, but support sustainable use by humans so that we can benefit and enjoy the natural environment. And just to say that many of the MPA sites of the Outer Hebrides do not have management yet decided. And what CESO is hoping to do is put stakeholders at the heart of the decision-making process and try and find a way of making the management move towards a situation where communities are properly involved in that. So I think that MPAs could complement in the future a regional marine plan decision-making framework that communities have inputted into and benefit from. And so why do we need MPAs? So they are designed to deliver us benefits, and they are basically designed to do this through conserving or recovering biodiversity. And this is because the natural environment on land and sea provides us with ecosystem services. And although crops pollination there is a land-based ecosystem service, the others, you'll find them in the sea. So harvesting our food and energy, storms and erosion and protection, and carbon storage, very important for climate change, and of course, our sense of interest in our place and home and identity and culture and history. And the stock of natural assets that provide these services often referred to natural capital, and we need it to run our economy. And then Scotland MPAs are part of that three-pillar approach that is addressing a sort of environmental protection at different levels to protect biodiversity. Why do we need biodiversity? So there's a couple of things just I'm trying to kind of draw your attention to on this slide. And obviously with the PDF, the hyperlinks that are embedded in the PDF are all things that you can hover on and go and click on a screen and look up later on if you're interested. And I'm sure you're aware already anyway of the descriptor review, which was published last year and was supported by an advisory panel drawn from all sorts of different areas important to our economy. And the headline messages from that review, there were many, or well, about 10, I think, but one that I've sort of pulled out and put on here is that our economy is embedded within nature, not external to it. And another really interesting thing that I've come across recently is the idea of donut economics, with a model proposed by economist Kate Raworth. And if you think of our current economic model, basically assumes that planetary resources are infinite and GDP is on this ever onward trajectory upwards. And we're fast discovering that this is broken. And this economic model thinks of things in a more circular context. We need to develop that circular economy if we're to address the crises that we've faced and create opportunities for our descendants. And so the infographic on this is the donut economics model. And if you think of a donut being something round with a hole in the middle, and the actual sort of flesh of the donut is the sweet spot. Basically what this picture is describing is that there are many sort of societal needs that we have, which we're experiencing shortfall on, and that'll be in terms of political voice, gender equality, peace and justice, and even food availability. And this is found in all communities, in fact, probably around the world, there's shortfall in many of these areas. And around the outside, you've got the aspects that the planet is delivering for us in order to be able to kind of survive. And there's also shortfall in some of those, and notably with the climate change, we've got a crisis on our hands there, and also biodiversity loss. So it's quite a kind of shocking thought, but economists now are working on ways of trying to kind of, work on solving this. So the next slide, this is an example of what we're trying to do with our stakeholder group. It's a case study kind of tile. In fact, just immediately before this meeting, I was working with a stakeholder group talking about examples like this. And this is one of several different ones we've got. It's a case study using an MPA to develop local markets. There's an area on the south coast of England, that's the biodiversity hotspot, with reefs supporting all sorts of lovely seabird communities, but also an important area for commercial fishing, recreation and tourism. And there was an area that was closed to mobile fishing gears, and also a bit of investment that was put forward to work on a project. And there was actually a consultative committee set up involving fishermen and the establishment of this reserve seafood label. And over about a 10-year period of monitoring and community participation in this committee, there was an increase in biodiversity, which supports obviously ecosystem function through those ecosystem services that I was talking about, and also an economic benefit through both commercial shellfish landings and the recreation and tourism benefits that were felt as well. Obviously, there were important socioeconomic concerns because through the establishment of this site, there was displacement of fishing activity and the need to diversify for some fishermen, obviously those who were practicing with mobile gear. So quite a lot to consider, but a really interesting example. The second one that I wanted to bring up was that there are two councils in talks with the Crown Estate about actually using a seabed lease to create an area specifically around harnessing benefits from kelp. And they want to have a site where they are specifically kind of geared towards kelp regeneration. Kelp is considered to be a carbon store, not the biggest, but it's an area also of much more research is needed on this. But it does store carbon, like all living things. But it also provides many other benefits, including storm protection, coastal erosion protection, as we know here in the Outer Hebrides too. So the councils are trying to set up this seabed lease for this blue carbon investment product. It's a project at the early stages, but I thought this is another really interesting thing that you might find interesting yourselves. And this is the penultimate slide, and it's a bit more about what we're doing specifically. This infographic is showing messages of concern that we learned from a 2020 survey in the Outer Hebrides. And in three main areas, the size of the circles on this diagram are scaled to the number of comments that we received from people and residents in the Outer Hebrides over these areas of concern around environmental changes, marine management and marine protected areas. So that's something you might want to look at a bit closer on your PDF, or there is a whole report available if you like. And so this year, we've got these three main areas of work that we're doing. We're listening to stakeholders to develop an overall vision for what communities want from the marine environment. And we're also doing quite targeted engagement, these case study examples that we're doing with stakeholder groups. And we've got a focus group that's orientated around the south of the Outer Hebrides. And also we're trying to sort of set up further groups where we've got time and resource. That's something else I'd probably quite like to pick up on the discussion with you. And finally, as well, we're just trying to raise awareness about MPAs and gather locally told stories that are important to people here, what's important about the sea, and publish them on our Story Map website, which we launched in February this year. So we'll put recommendations from the project out in early 2022 for public consultation, that is. And the project will be complete about this time next year. And so that's the last slide. There's these blue bits of text are hyperlinks to pieces of information and reports that you might want to look at. There's my contact details and my phone number. And I'm always really happy to talk to anyone about marine management, marine protected areas and stakeholder involvement. So I'll just end that there. and stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Charlie, for that presentation. Invite members now if they have any questions or observations on the presentation. Councillor Fulton.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Charlie, for that presentation. Very, very good. Just 2 or 3 questions. In regard to MPAs, what kind of displacement of fishing effort have we seen from MPAs, and has there been any economic impact analysis carried out regarding that? Also, how effective is the policing of MPAs? And just finally, when the MPAs were decided, was the fishing activity based on IC's rectangles, or was there more localised drilling down into areas? So yeah, I'd be interested in that. Thank you.
Okay, Charlie, thanks.
Okay, thanks for those questions. Can I just check I understood the third of those? Something about IC's rectangles. Is that to do with the areas proposed? Can you just clarify that point?
Yeah, the IC's rectangles where the portions split up for fishery control purposes and for scientific analysis purposes. Quite a blunt tool, but it is a recognised definition of sea areas for fishery control and fishery science. But as I say, it can be quite a blunt tool and sometimes more localised, drilling down onto fishing activity rather than IC's rectangles.
Okay,
yeah, thanks. Okay, yeah, so displacement of fishing effort, yeah, that is an important concern. I mean, obviously, I'm like, actually, each of your questions would, I would imagine, be much better answered here by somebody from Marine Scotland, because they're all areas in which Marine Scotland Policy Department are, have an area of interest and responsibility. But I guess from the project's point of view, yes, I agree completely. Like, fisheries obviously underpin the communities here, and any management that's brought in that's a fisheries management measure will create a displacement of effort. And it's something that I bring up myself a lot, actually, because, this bringing community empowerment to the Outer Hebrides, has an effect on national kind of like policy level. So these are conversations that need to be had at the highest level in order for, for us to be able to kind of, win and succeed in making communities here more empowered. But I mean, I guess all I can say is I agree that displacement of fishing effort is a critical thing to consider. Leasing of MPAs, again, Marine Scotland are tasked with that, and I'm not sure how effective it is, perhaps not effective enough. But then I suppose on that point, there are some really good projects now where remote monitoring equipment is being, rolled out to entire fleets. And although, some of the work is taking quite a long time to deliver, I'm aware that, for example, the Scotland fleet has signed up to and will be sort of engaging in having an entire fleet sort of monitored remotely. And that really helped, I think, probably from the point of view of, fishermen as well as everyone, really. And with the IC's rectangles, yeah, I agree that is a very, very coarse resolution, framework on which to be looking at fisheries landings. So I don't know what information I can provide other than to say that inshore fishing isn't helped by the coarseness of the resolution. And I speak to small operators, who've got such a detailed kind of knowledge and of the grounds they fish. But yeah, when you're reporting at IC's rectangle level, like it's just hugely kind of inappropriate for that small scale. I don't know if that helps.
Okay, Charlie, thank you.
Thanks so much, Charlie. That's great. The Isle of Man have very, very successful MPAs, which were
Okay. Has to be read. That's Gordon. That's you.
That's it. Yeah, thanks a lot, Charlie. That was really good. Yeah, the Isle of Man has had MPAs for a number of years, which have initially were the fishing industry were very unhappy with it. But over the last 2-3 years, they've seen huge success with the closed areas, and the king scallop fishery and the queen scallop fishery has been hugely successful and is one of the last remaining queen scallop fisheries in the Irish Sea. So lots of good things from there. So thanks so much for your presentation.
okay. Thank you, Councillor McCormack, then Councillor McMillan, then Councillor Murray.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wonder, Charlie, if I can ask you the extent of your interest. I'm thinking in particular of the area to the west of the islands where the Crown Estate has designated certain areas for the possibility of offshore wind. Do you have an interest? Is that what this diagram is showing us? And do you know of any other designations in other offshore wind sites throughout the UK so that we could have some idea of just exactly what the implications are?
Thank you. Well, just on the first of those points, as far as I'm aware, from the different kind of maps and conversations that I've heard and been a part of, the extent of interest and the scoping and for the offshore wind in Northwest Lewis, I don't think it overlaps the designations that were on the map that is in my presentation, because the offshore, well, I say offshore, like all of the designations that we have and interested in this project are in the Outer Hebrides marine region, so within 12 nautical miles, and there's a designation around St Kilda, but in terms of an inshore kind of area to the northwest of Lewis, I don't think there are designations in the sea there, although I suppose, you know, as EIAs and scoping kind of all kind of, you know, come to the fore, there will be interest in all of those applications by, you know, relevant kind of authorities and NGOs even. So I mean, yeah, like the project's you know, working to what we've got at the moment in terms of designations, which is you know, what I showed on that map. And then in terms of other designations and what's coming, I mean, I guess you will have seen the stated kind of policy intent kind of document from the SNP and the Greens. They did mention in that document a commitment to marine protected areas and the marine protected area network and the idea of highly protected marine areas. I don't know any more than that, but obviously it's something that we need to be aware of and, you know, where appropriate, sort of bring into the conversation, because I wouldn't want to be, you know, sort of anything other than transparent on anything.
Thank you, Charlie. Councillor McMillan.
Thank you, Chairman. My views on MPAs and the effect they have on the fishing community and the coastal communities are well known, and I've communicated that to the project before. My concern here, I won't go into the effects of MPAs is the Crown Estate seabed lease to harness benefits from kelp. Now, that's a brilliant way to maximise your monopoly that you control the seabed, and now that they are using blue carbon investment as a means of flushing money through to the Crown Estate. Now, as somebody who thinks that we should have an elected head of state, even if that remains the same family, it's beside the point. Is this a fundamental part of the project that the Crown Estate is being eased in to get blue carbon through the kelp? And is that the designation that I see on the west coast of Uist, on the sound of Harris, on the west coast of Barra? Thank you.
Don't know if you can answer that, Jerry.
Well, just to say that the councils that have been in talks with the Crown Estate about that project were on the south coast of England. So it was the Worthing and Ada councils, which is on the south coast of Sussex. It's a new project, and I just came across it in a news item and thought it sounded quite interesting because, as we know, there is a Crown Estate Scotland pilot now, where local decision making and revenues, it will be an example, sort of leading towards community empowerment and also benefit financially from all of that. So I mean, obviously that's in one part of the Outer Hebrides, but could be a really good model on which to sort of move forward and move towards regional marine planning as well.
Thank you, Charlie. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Charlie, for the presentation. I was quite interested to see that basically two traditional Hebridean products such as peat and now kelp are hugely invaluable now for carbon capture and carbon sinks. And I was just going to ask, in terms of the blue carbon item, are there any other areas that you know of that are using kelp as carbon capture that you could tell us of, and how's it going? Thanks.
Well, as far as I've been, investigating and aware so far, I think we're sort of early doors with some of this, because in particular in Scotland, the amount of data available and the research kind of underpinning, our knowledge around how much carbon is stored by kelp. There's, we actually sort of like have a long way to go in fully understanding that. And in terms of like habitats, carbon storage is it's important in anything, living on the seabed, and kelp is one of those things. And we have a lot of kelp, and it is considered an important carbon storage habitat. But probably more important, in fact, as far as recent research shows, more important in terms of habitats are Merle, and also sand dunes, salt marsh. So in terms of kelp and products, projects kind of going on to look at that in a blue carbon context. That seabed lease one's the only one that I've come across that is tangibly around, attaching it to a carbon storage idea, although there is a lot of interest now in kelp, and obviously, climate crisis and blue carbon. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are others out there already, and perhaps others will come along.
Thanks for that.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Charlie. This might be more of a question for Mr. McPhee, but you mentioned during your presentation a number of times involving the local community and local engagement, etc., etc. I wondered at Mr. Middleton's report 5.2, the issue discussed about the two local focus groups, one Barra and South Uist. I just wondered how these have worked. I know about the one in Barra, but I just wondered if it's something that has worked, bearing in mind what you've just said in terms of local engagement and local management going forward.
Charlie, and Joe, if wants to come in later.
Maybe more for Joe.
Maybe for Joe.
Well, I'll maybe let Charlie answer first. She may have more up-to-date information on the focus groups and how they've gone. Charlie, is there any further information on the?
Yeah, I was actually in a meeting of the focus group directly before this meeting, and I've got another one planned for the 1st of October. We reached out in forming that focus group. We reached out to individuals who'd been involved previously in co-management kind of work that had been presented to Marine Scotland through a report, and that was led by Voluntary Action Barrow and Battersea around about 2014, I think. So we reached out to key members of the community and key sort of councillors in order to sort of set that up. And it's going all right. We're having some really fruitful discussions. I think the one thing we all agree is that a top-down situation, as far as management goes, isn't working, and we don't want it. We want to work towards something that involves community. So it's really open-ended process. Obviously, it's about listening to community's views and trying to present them, and then consult on what we find, more widely, obviously, so everybody's got a say in that. Yeah, so I mean, that's my take on them for the moment.
Thank you, Joe. Do you want to come in there?
Yes, thanks. No, I have nothing further to add. I think as far as we can see, these focus groups, as was held earlier today, at least are up and running and discussing these matters. So I think that's a critical part of this project, I think, and trying to make sure that the community is at the heart of what's going on here, because of the significant impact it's going to have on the local economy, particularly the fishing and fish catching and fish processing sectors.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. I mean, public engagement is really important, and engagement with the stakeholders, and hopefully a strong recommendation will come out in your report next year about that. We've campaigned for a long time regarding the management and governance of the MPAs, and we'll continue to do so, ensuring there's a lot of local input and engagement. I mean, not long ago, myself and the director met with Mary John in her previous post, and I think we need to continue that dialogue with the Minister in her role as Islands Minister to reinforce our view about the management of the MPAs going forward. So I think we need to re-engage with the Minister on that and make sure it's a priority for us going forward. But if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank Charlie on your behalf for our presentation. And we look forward to hearing more how the project progresses. Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks.
Now the recommendations for that item are a 3.1 for your agreement. Read. Now, with your permission, I'm going to take item 10 at the moment, please, to allow input from Mr. McGuillan, who has to leave for a flight. And it's the Outer Hebrides Local Development Plan, the supplementary guidance on wind energy development. This is a report by the Head of Economic Development and Planning. This guidance has been out of consultation and is for your approval as part of the Outer Hebrides Local Development Plan. And Mary McKeever is here to speak to the report and answer any questions. Is it Mary or Susan? Sorry, Susan.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do a brief introduction and then Susan will cover the report.
Okay.
Thank you. The following report presents the supplementary guidance for adoption, which has been finalised following a period of public consultation. The process for preparing and seeking to adopt supplementary guidance is set out in legislation for it to then be adopted as a statutory part of the development plan. Subject to approval, the guidance would be then submitted to Scottish ministers for a period of notice of adoption. Susan will introduce the report itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Good afternoon. Oh, hi there.
Hi.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Following a period of public consultation on the draft supplementary guidance for wind energy development, we've now considered responses received and we've finalised the document, where appropriate, to reflect consultees' responses. These include suggested amendments and updates to policy, guidance and information. No significant changes have been made to policy. However, we have clarified the spatial strategy and provided a table to explain each of the 3 maps and how we have presented the designations and other considerations to reflect Scottish planning policy. As set out in section 6 of the covering report, we have taken on some comments from key agencies where appropriate to provide additional clarity, strengthen and improve the readability for some of the policy sections. The reference to the Scottish Planning Policy 2020 edition has reverted to the 2014 edition in line with Scottish Government's direction, although this has had no fundamental bearing on the principles of the guidance. Following publication of National Planning Framework 4, which will incorporate the new Scottish planning policy, we may undertake a more substantial review of the guidance. Subject to approval at committee and Comhairle, we will submit this supplementary guidance to the Scottish Government for notice of adoption as part of the statutory Outer Hebrides Local Development Plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Susan. Any questions for Susan? Mr. McMillan.
Thank you, Chairman, for taking this item early on. Now, if I can work the thing. Thank you for the presentation. I have major concerns about the way we are putting into statute any effort in the areas of North Uist and Harris where the national scenic areas preclude any development at all. We may as well say to the people of Harris, pack up and go somewhere else, because we will not allow you to develop any form of means to generate income from the land that you have. And similarly in North Uist, where half the island is in a national scenic area. Now, I'm not quite sure where the national scenic area has been given this sort of status, where you can't do any development on it. Why can't we just say these areas on the map are going to be devoid of people if we can help it? This is a recipe for failure and depopulation. And similarly with most of Lewis, it's regarded as a national, but a European protected site. I think it's what it is. So that means that all of the grazings committees and townships would be precluded from doing any form of development on these moors. So we have to look at this from a population retention scheme, and that's what we have to do. And following that, what I mentioned in the proposed amendment was the conditions that we imposed on the one at Drumlehan in Tolsta. And if you look at page 25, I think it was, of the report, we should amend that so that the conditions that were applied to the Drumlehan wind farm in Tolsta should be our default setting, so that every other community who wants to develop something has that as the basis. And on the spatiality thing, what we are doing is designing out any form of development and any means to empower communities to help themselves. And I would recommend that we put an amendment in that we seek to allow the people of Harris and North Uist to develop wind farms in their areas. They know it's scenic, they don't have to be told. But what we are doing is preventing them from developing any means of generating an income in these areas. What we have to do is avoid making the islands that we have here into St Kilda. And that is a complete tragedy and a disaster for people. We have to look at doing this, and I would propose that we amend, if I can find it, section page 25, noise and the community amenity, to match that we opposed on Drumlane.
Well, first of all, Mr. Macmillan, the Drumlane process is still live and going through this Section 75 process. And secondly, this is a policy and guidance document, and it's not about conditions. And at the same time, we cannot impose conditions on any future applications that have been, because they've been used in current applications. So I'm not accepting that amendment. And thirdly, in terms of your comments about areas not being able to land, not being able to be developed because of specific and natural beauties, etc. That is a national policy. That is national policy, and that is something that I hope you would join with us in making representations to the government, so that areas are opened up for development in that way. But I'm going to ask Susan or Mary to come in and speak.
Chair, thank you. I'll come in on that. Thank you. In relation to, as you've set out, Chair, the issue in relation to national scenic areas is determined at a national level. That is in Scottish planning policy, and that is directed. But it applies only to wind farms, which was something that was up to individual authorities to designate, to determine what constituted a wind farm. Now, we've been through a process to do that with members in the past. In relation to designations, for example, in Lewis, they come under the category of having areas of significant protection. That does not preclude development, but it does require assessment against the individual application and the designations that apply.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mary. Any more questions? Mr. Murray?
Thank you, Chair. Just listening to Councillor Macmillan and your response on terms of this document is not setting conditions. Can I ask about on page 13? There's on the document there's limits on the noise, and I think there's 35 and 38 decibels mentioned. Would that not be a constraint, or is that just guidance? Or if someone was going to apply for a wind turbine, would they have to follow these conditions, for want of a better word? I do recall, I think it was the last 2 years, that there was a community wind turbine granted permission, but the noise conditions were, in my view, quite harsh. They were 30 decibels when it was about 2.5 miles away from the nearest development now.
The guidance around noise has been determined through national good practice and guidance, and also in relation in conjunction with our environmental health colleagues. All individual applications will be looked at on an individual basis, and that will relate to the topography around them, the noise, the specific noise receptors that could apply. So that's how there has to be some framework against which individual applications are determined. And bear in mind that the sections referred to here are for wind farms, and there is a policy also for individual smaller scaled developments. I can't recall if they alter the noise levels. Noting that technology is evolving all the time in relation to individual turbines as well.
I think my point, sorry, Chair, I think my point was that I felt the wind turbine the conditions were quite harsh. Now, when you're seeing it in this supplementary guidance as being a little bit less constrictive, I don't know if there's a lack of consistency, but if you're seeing it's on a case-by-case basis.
That's the advice and the guidance. Okay, Mr. McMillan.
Thank you, Chairman. I would still propose an amendment that we follow the conditions that we approved at Drumlehan, because we are now seeking to...
Well, thanks, Mr. McMillan. I'm sorry for interrupting, but I made that is still a live application, and we cannot discuss that or include any of that in any amendment. Thank you. That's my ruling. But I can point out to you on page 7 of the guidance that is, the community generation. There is a lot in there about supporting communities and landowning bodies to realise potential for wind energy projects. So we have a track record of supporting communities with wind energy projects in this corner. Okay, the recommendations are at 3.1 for your agreement.
Excuse me, Chairman, could I record my dissent from that? Because I would refer you to page 25 of the document, and that's what I would like to change. But I would...
You can record your dissent, yes. Thank you, Mr. McGrath. Can we now return to the agenda at item 4, and that's the ScotWind offshore wind and related developments. And there's an introductory report by John Cunningham, and he's going to give a presentation on the current situation with the ScotWind leasing round.
Thanks, Chair. If you just let me share my screen. Is that visible, Chair?
Yes. Yeah. I think it's okay. Do people have it on their iPads? Yes, we've got it on their iPads too.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. As members will know, that ScotWind is an offshore wind leasing round administered by Crown Estate Scotland, and it aims to deliver 10 gigawatts of generation across 15 areas of deployment. And developers were invited to submit bids into this leasing round that closed on 17th of July this year. And we anticipate results coming through from Crown Estate Scotland on the 17th of January 2022. There are 3 areas of deployment. Members will be familiar with this map. 3 areas of deployment in the Hebridean region. Northeast of the Bud of Lewis, we have N2, which is in very deep water, suitable only for floating offshore wind with a maximum capacity of 2 gigawatts. N3 is northwest of the Bud of Lewis, again in deep water, suitable only for floating offshore wind. That's got a maximum capacity also of 2 gigawatts. And then N4 between Carloway and Barvas, which is close to shore. It's conventional bottom fixed wind, and it's got a maximum capacity of 1 gigawatt. So we expect N4 to be released earlier, possibly from 2027, and the other 2 areas in the north to move forward, maybe 2029 onwards. Now, the Corner's role is to secure the maximum benefit for local communities through these deployments. And it's quite challenging when the system has no statutory recognition of community benefit. So when Crown Estate Scotland grants a lease, there's no consideration of community benefit. And when Marine Scotland grant consent, there's no recognition there either. So it really falls down to a voluntary agreement between the developer and the community. And we've had 2 prospective ScotWind developers approach us recently in regard to these areas. Northland Power is a Canadian company. They're bidding into areas N2 and N4. And there's a second company which has not yet publicised its interest in ScotWind, so I can only refer to them as Company 2 at the moment. and they're bidding into areas N3 and N4. Now we've focused on N4 because that's the first one to be released. It's the closest to shore. It'll have the most impact on island communities. And we've sought over the summer months to develop a memorandum of understanding with the developers and with the local community. So the process has been led by the Comhairle. It's included the 5 West Side estates, landowning estates. 4 of them are community owned, 1 is privately owned, and the developers have been involved in that process too. And part 1 of the memorandum, which is it's appended to the report, it outlines a menu of projects put forward by these communities, by these states, under the headings population stabilisation, low carbon skills, climate action, community wealth building, and visitor economy development. Part 2 of the memorandum is slightly more open-ended. This is where the Comhairle takes responsibility to secure benefit for the wider Western Isles, not just the communities that can see the wind turbines, but the communities from the Bud to Barra. So in there are ideas like shared ownership in electricity to combat fuel poverty and production, again for retail, for the benefit of the community. Some developers are looking at electrolyzing at sea, producing hydrogen at sea and pipelining it ashore. So there's an option there for a share in generated hydrogen as well. And there's that open-ended statement, support with identifying island energy priorities and delivering solutions. So quite open-ended in that part of the memorandum. The first part is quite prescriptive and it's come from the communities themselves. Part 2, that's where we'll be looking for member input going forward as to how we define that benefit and how we spread it through the communities from the Bud to Barra. One of the challenges we have at what we're trying to achieve is that SSE is insisting that all ScotWind developers in the North region, that's N1 to N4, connect to a single regional hub at Doonray. And this is emerging through the ongoing offshore transmission network review. It's a review carried out by National Grid, SSE and Scottish Power. That's really a reaction to what happened with the English round of Crown Estate leasing. There it was a free for all in terms of grid connection. So in East Anglia, you'll soon have a profusion of substations and overhead lines as each developer makes their own way to grid. For ScotWind, they're keen to avoid that. So this review's come forward with a proposal, and it is just a proposal at the moment, that all North region connections come into Doonray as the base for that area. That's challenging for the islands on 2 fronts, Chair. First of all, if you don't have landfall in the island, your hand is weakened in terms of what you can negotiate for community benefit. You know, the Shetland example for oil and gas was that these developers had landfall at Sullenvoe, and there's quite considerable benefits on the back of that. If the developers in our area, so to speak, are compelled to connect to Doonray and bypass the islands, our hand is considerably weakened because we cannot argue for disruption benefit or disruption through the construction of substations, through cabling and all these associated things. The second point is that we currently have the Western Isles transmission link is conditionally approved at 450 for onshore wind. We obviously want a 600 megawatt cable, and members will be well aware of this argument. Ofgem have said 450 conditionally approved and a 600 cable if additional generators connect. And at the moment we have 420 megawatts onshore, and these developers, the ScotWind developers we've been speaking to, have offered to put some generation onshore in order to make the case for that 600 cable. It gets them generation into the system as early as 2027. Otherwise, they're waiting for 2032, 2033 for Doonray to come online. And a larger cable obviously benefits the onshore developers because they'd be far better off taking a smaller percentage of the cost of a larger cable than paying a large percentage of a smaller cable. So it does benefit them as well. So the leader has written to National Grid, SSE, Scottish Power and both energy ministers, making the point that the Western Isles link is not a new link that has sprung up in response to ScotWind. It's something that's been there for, the proposal's been there for a long time, so we're not creating a new connection. So we will keep members informed on that. Turning to the Outer Hebrides Net Zero Hub at Arnish, again, members will be very aware of this project. It's centred around the Deepwater Terminal. When we last met as a committee, the proposal was that we use onshore wind as the feed for hydrogen, and that would come into the system around about 2027 when there's the shared ownership and Lewis Wind comes forward. Since that meeting, Technip FMC, an offshore developer, has approached us looking to test a floating wind wave platform in the midge of Arnish. So that could become an additional source of electricity for electrolysis at Arnish. The hub's configured in such a way that it's scaled up to receive electricity supply from ScotWind developments. There's large-scale hydrogen storage planned both above ground, and Technip, as part of their proposal, would like to pilot seabed storage, which I'll mention in a moment is very significant. We then have the big opportunity in 2027 for SGN's gas network conversion. And then beyond that, we scale up to commercial export of hydrogen by developers onshore and offshore into 29, 30 and beyond, exporting through ammonia or methanol conversion. And the base, of course, also becomes a principal supply base for ScotWind through the work of Harland and Wolff and the deepwater terminal itself. And that's just an artist's impression of the deepwater terminal, looking back at some existing uses at Arnish and the converter station image on the right. The two grey buildings on the right are a visualization of the converter station. So in terms of the delivery of the hub, Chair, we see this being delivered in 3 phases now. It was 2 phases previously, commencing 2027. We now have the addition of this first phase with Technip FMC working with us. So in terms between 2024 and 2027, we have an electricity feed possibly from offshore wind from the Technip platform and from new build onshore wind. And that's fed into the net zero hub in the central box, where electrolyzers might be placed on a site that's prepared by the public sector. So we see a kind of test campus at Arnish where different developers can come in and install hardware on a site that's been provided by the agencies with building and infrastructure in place for hydrogen production. And one of the early interests is a company called Plus Zero. That's David Amos, who used to be the program manager for the Islands deal. David has started up a new business, which is his business case is supplying Hebridean hydrogen to UK festivals, and he's looking to expand beyond that. But it's branded Hebridean hydrogen, which comes from these islands. So he'd like a presence there, and Technip themselves require a presence because they'd like to experiment with that offshore platform. Their vision is for electrolysis at sea, so they'd like to use seawater feed into the electrolyzer at Arnish just to experiment with various factors in the process. We need above ground storage, and we'll also hopefully test subsea storage with partners Technip FMC. In terms of demand on the right hand side, we have the UK festivals that David's identified, the possibility of some local authority fleet, maybe some short range buses changing over to hydrogen. SSE have committed in the next business plan period from 2023 to 2028 to swap out 2 of the 10 engines at Battery Point diesel engines for what they call clean diesel engines. Now we're proposing to them that should be hybrid hydrogen or even monofuel hydrogen, because they have flexibility there to configure the engines in different ways. They're not fully dependent, hopefully never again, on all 10 engines running concurrently. So there's a good opportunity to trial hydrogen there, and they seem quite receptive to that. And then David's also been speaking to a Belgian shipping company who have 11 supply ships running on hydrogen in the North Sea, and they would like to take some hydrogen from this facility. The second phase members will know about from 2027 onwards. It's anchored very much on the SGN opportunity. In terms of the feed, there's the additional boxes in green. In terms of the feed, there's possibly a community ownership in ScotWind plus community ownership in onshore wind in terms of the 20% of Lewis wind power. Then at the hub itself, there's additional production ramping up to supply the SGN network. There's the seabed storage being trialled at a commercial basis, additional storage above ground to satisfy resilience requirements for SGN, and a pipeline to take that product into the town centre. And then in terms of demand, we have the SGN's customers, obviously. Then we have some local heat and industrial processes. We are talking to companies like Hebridean Seaweed and BASF Pharma in Breasclett, who use eye-watering amounts of kerosene and electricity to turn water into steam. And if you burn hydrogen in a vacuum, it produces only steam with no waste. So they're very interested in a hydrogen supply from the hub. And then there's the perennial promise of hydrogen ferries, which rolls on. Then in the final phase, beyond 2029, we're into export. So the amber boxes that are added here ScotWind generation for either for electrolysis at Arnish or even the supply of hydrogen gas itself directly to export. And that export is shown on the right-hand side in the demand section. Mentioned Technip FMC. This is the platform that they'd like to trial off Arnish. It was heading to the Canary Islands because they weren't aware of any facility in Scotland where it could connect into this volume of electrolysis. So they've become very interested in the Arnish project. They were here yesterday visiting the site, and it's really a wave converter system built into the base of this device with a wind turbine on top, and that's connected by private wire back to electrolysis onshore. Ultimately, they like to electrolyse offshore, but they like to de-risk it initially by having the electrolyzers onshore and using piped seawater for that exercise. And the other concept they bring is seabed storage of hydrogen. You can see these modules on the seabed in the diagram. This would be very interesting for Arnish because the level of resilience required by SGN for the gas network, the level of backup gas that they need in terms of hydrogen, it's going to represent football fields of storage above ground in Arnish, whereas it can all be done subsea, out of sight, and much more safely through this sort of arrangement. So we're very keen to take that forward with Technip FMC. This slide, the time's gone, Chair. I don't go through the slide in detail. It's just an outline for members of the work we're involved in the energy unit. But just to pick out maybe 2 points in terms, first of all, in terms of funding for the energy hub. We do have £11 million already allocated through the Islands deal heads of terms towards the energy hub, and we've just applied 2 weeks ago to the Scottish Futures Trust's Green Growth Accelerator programme for a £150,000 Pathfinder next year, and that's followed up by a £10 million substantive project from 2024 onwards. So the money is starting to roll towards the project. And then towards the bottom of the slide, there's mention there of Barra, Technip FMC's product there that I've outlined. It's known as Deep Purple. They have been in discussion with the Barra and Battersea community for some time regarding a small deployment of Barra, and that deployment would take constrained generation from the Barra and Battersea turbine, take it offshore, turn it into hydrogen, and return the hydrogen into the Barra economy. Now, we've been very clear with Technip from the beginning that if the Arnish project in any way is going to undermine the Barra project, then the Comhairle cannot support it. We've said both projects have to go ahead together, and they've assured us in turn that these 2 projects are complementary, that they're trying to achieve different things, and they will develop both projects together. And final slide, Chair, is to do with green data centres. We had a visit from a team of consultants appointed by Crown Estate Scotland and the Scottish Government looking at possible sites in Scotland for a large green data centre. They were looking for secure location, land availability, 100 megawatts of generation initially, ramping up to gigawatts in the 2030s, and next generation fibre. Unfortunately, Arnish ticked all these boxes, and we just heard in the last fortnight that Arnish is now on the shortlist for a green data centre. The total of 15 sites in Scotland, going after three large data centres. So we're very well placed in that regard, and just a note of optimism to finish on, Chair. So a lot of detail there, Chair, but happy to try and answer any questions that members might have.
Very good, John. Well, Deep Purple, one of the director's favourite bands, although he doesn't have the hair to headbang along to the songs anymore. Thanks, John. You've packed a lot into that presentation. Any questions from members? Convener, then Councillor McCormack.
Thank you. Just in relation to the earlier discussion that John gave us, I think it would be an unmitigated disaster if landfall from the offshore wind on the north and west of the Hebrides isn't connected through the island and from then on across the Minch elsewhere. I think we would consider that a significant failure, not just on our part, but on the government as well. And without that, it's going to be very, very difficult for us to having spent much more than 10 years in trying to find a way of renewable energy, regardless of which way it is, whether it's direct renewable energy or whether it's hydrogen, and things are moving apace. And we do need to be well positioned to do that, because if we don't, then once again, we could be left a long, long way behind the rest of Scotland, far less further afield. So I think the presentation that John gave is quite inspirational in many ways, but there are an awful lot of loose ends that need to be tied together for it to work for us.
Absolutely, Convener. Yeah. John, do you want to come back and...
I just to say that we recognise that point and that danger, and the leader, as I say, has written to National Grid, SSE, Scottish Power, and both energy ministers, just saying what a disaster it would be if we missed out on this opportunity. And I think we might see some content in media this week on the work the leader's been doing. So we are out front with that.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor McCormick.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, John, for your presentation. An awful lot of work has gone into this. My first question is, are the developers and Crown Estate suggesting that a cable be laid from the west of our islands to Dounreay? Is that what the implication is?
Yes, on the face of it, Councillor McCormick, it would be a connection of N2, N3, N4 all to Dounreay. Now, we've pointed out that's 180 kilometres subsea. What is the sense in doing that when you're 6 kilometres off the west coast of Lewis?
Indeed.
So it is really a crazy suggestion as we see it.
Yes, it's quite bizarre. But then you have suggestions of cables being laid from Iceland to Scotland, that type of thing. You know, it's just bizarre. It would be lovely if we could think of common sense being applied to the renewables industry. That would be a wonderful situation. I'd far rather we could have a bit more control over the situation than we currently have. We're so dependent on other agencies working with us, and common sense being applied, as the convener has indicated. My other question is, how do you see our current community generators being involved in this enormous project?
Yeah, I think as outlined in the previous committee meeting, we see them being involved in the substantive project, starting with SGN, because by then the process is de-risked, it's commercial, it's easier to get access into. The first phase I mentioned there from 2024 to 27, it's exceptionally high commercial risk. It's going to require Technip to invest 40 to 50 million pounds of own resources into the project. It's not something we would really want to expose the community to, but we still have that commitment that once it's commercialised, once it's mainstreamed, and we are supplying the gas network, there will be an input there from the community.
Okay, and is that currently written into your plan?
Yeah, we shared at the last committee that we obviously see the communities contributing, and one interesting thing, the cable does come from west to east across the island. There's a willingness from the developers to allow community generators on the west coast of Lewis who are currently unable to build turbines. There's a willingness to allow them to connect into that, effectively a private cable, to get power to Arnish to generate hydrogen for retail and a return. So there is a commitment in the whole strategy to enable. It's becoming very challenging for communities now to connect to grid because of CFD and another report that's coming up on transmission charges. But a real opportunity for generators all over the island to come into Arnish and to generate, to make hydrogen.
That would be very beneficial, I think. Can you say anything about the discussions that communities on the west coast of Lewis have had with the developers?
Yeah, as I've said, there are 5 communities: Golson, Barbas, Dalmore, Carloway and Bernera. Now, four community owned are going through the process. Dalmore is a small one that's privately owned, but shares the aspirations of the other 4. So we were concerned initially that there might be some competition between these estates in terms of, say, landfall. Landfall can only happen in one place. Would there be some competition? So we took some steps to get the 5 estates together, and they've now formed themselves into a West Side estate group, and they are speaking with one voice on this. It's really worked exceptionally well. And they're speaking to us initially, and they've spoken to both developers directly by Teams, by Microsoft Teams. So they have a good relationship with both developers, and they've come up with their own suite of projects, which is embedded into the MOU that you have as an appendix.
Thanks, Mr. McCormack. Thank you, John, for that present. Oh, Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, John, for an excellent and very comprehensive report. There's so many opportunities, positive opportunities. I know you and your team and also the leader are working behind the scenes. Is there any way we could encourage national politicians from both governments to, put their shoulder to the wheel in terms of encouraging developers and developments to happen here? Because there's a lot of people with their hands up in this industry saying, come and develop here. Are we using the full political powers or the politicians to further our aims?
To be honest, Chair, we're not using it to the extent we could at the moment, and maybe that's an action we can take forward from this committee. There is certainly a momentum building, and one is divisive. Onshore, offshore is also a divisive issue, and some politicians might want to steer clear of it. But there is a momentum building now for real transformational community development. So I think maybe the time is right to invite our politicians to come on board with this.
Absolutely. Thank you. Mr. McMillan.
Thank you, Chairman. I welcome this report, and I see that a huge amount of work has gone into it, and it sets out in a systematic way where we would have to support various things, because although we can't put money towards some or any of the projects, we can have the hydrogen link and the process that was made known to us, I think in June, that we're working towards. So it's not just the systematic, but it's also the synergy and the symbiosis that we get from this, such as the green data center. And it's these spin-off things where we can hopefully be facilitative to these companies coming in, because they have a worldwide remit technique. And if we can get the basis here, it will also help Arnish and hopefully other parts of the islands as well. So yes, thank you. It's a good report and I welcome it. And like Councillor MacLeod said, if we can get some of our national and UK politicians to be involved, I think we should try and work on that as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan, for that. Thank you, John, again for a detailed presentation.
Thanks, Chair.
Recommendations are. Sorry. Oh, sorry. I can't see if your light is red there, Vice Chairman. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, John, for the presentation, and to the Director and the Department for all the hard work that's gone into this report. I think this is probably one of the most positive things I've heard in this chamber for a long time. But I think, again, advising caution, treading slowly and cautiously forward and not blowing too many trumpets. And I think from what I've heard, it's ticking off the boxes one by one, not making any spectacular announcements, not pronouncements about what we're going to be doing, but just making sure that we proceed with diligence and caution and move forward and get to the ends we've set ourselves. We've heard enough from other projects throughout Scotland about big fanfares and they've fallen flat on their faces, and I think it's incumbent on us just to proceed here again with caution. And going forward, I think this is probably going to be transformational for our islands, for our local community developers, for other aspirations that we have to transform our economy. So it's a brilliant report, and like I say, I hope it does transform these islands in the years to come. But again, one step at a time, and I think it's a fantastic opportunity for us. So great to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
Well done, guys.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Okay, the recommendations are 3.1 there for your agreement. Now, we're now moving to the performance management items, item 5 and 6. Item 5 is the performance management for the first quarter. The report is for note and provides an overview of the department's business plan and related performance for economic development and planning in the first quarter. And Joe will speak to the report and answer any questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The report is before you, and that's starting at paragraph 6.2 of the report. In terms of heritage activities, the Museum Ninyaling at Lewis Castle opened to the public on the 15th of June through restricted access. For that period, to the end of June, we had 1,308 visitors. For comparison, July we had just over 2,800, and for August over 3,000 visitors. The team have been involved in successful funding bids to Port na Gaelic for a Gaelic collections officer, and to Museums and Galleries Scotland for various children's activities. Various projects are all progressing well, including the archaeology-related projects, in particular the storage project, the UVAP project, and the redevelopment of the Historic Environment Record database. In terms of planning services, for development management, the case numbers are above average for the quarter. Members will be aware that we are prioritising the determination of applications to ensure performance is maintained. Delighted that we have a new planning officer now in post, and the team have been working, as I said, prioritising the determination of applications, while there's still a lot of pre-planning advice demand for that. I've also been involved in the planning performance framework annual submission, which was submitted on time, and that relates to both the development management team and the development planning team. And moving on to the development planning team, the PPF has been a key activity. In addition to that, the team have been involved with the housing land audit, and the engagement and preparation of supplementary guidance reports, some of which have been considered and others to be considered later in the agenda, maintaining the development plan and actions arising from the new Act. For building standards, above average number of applications for the quarter, increase in the income targets, and John Angus and his team currently working on proposals to fill the vacancy left by the building standards officer. Moving on to economic development, in particular business gateway, high level of COVID-related recovery activity and continued advice and support on various schemes. As you can see, 210 of the sort of 257 inquiries have been COVID related. 19 new startups in the period, and the team are currently working on a new scheme to utilise the remaining discretionary funding available to support recovery, and further information will be circulated on that very shortly. The leader team working on supporting the administration of the programme and the projects, and currently awaiting further government information on any future CLLD activity. Similarly, under the Fisheries and Marine, the activity has been focused on ensuring the full utilisation of the EMFF funding, supporting the Island Steel primary industries theme, and supporting other projects like the MARPAN project and activity under the Fisheries Investment Scheme. Moving on to the regeneration team, secured over 3 million of external funding for economic regen projects, continue to support the RCGF projects. We had 7 applications to round 9, and we got information through last week that 4 of those have been successful through to the next stage of round 9, so we're delighted with that. but there's a significant amount of activity involved in supporting the various RCGF projects, and lots of detailed hands-on activity by David and Kenny and Alison. Significant activity on key projects across the economic development team. There's a lot of work going on with the Islands Deal projects and the preparation of the outline business cases. The team have also been involved in supporting the submission of the bids to UK government funding for CRF, and in working up proposals for the Levelling Up Fund. Good progress on key projects, Castle Grounds regeneration, Spaceport 1, continued development of activity, the Great Place project, activity around governance review and developing heritage asset audit. We've secured 30,000 for strategic investment in tourism as part of RTIF, Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund. The proposal is to develop a strategic infrastructure plan rather than just simply applying on a round-by-round basis. So let's have a coordinated strategic plan over the next number of years to ensure that we are investing in the areas of the greatest priority to support tourism infrastructure. In terms of local government benchmarking framework, we'll continue to monitor progress against the prioritised actions. All budgets are expected to outturn as per the budget as at Q1. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you, Joe, for a lot of information there to digest. Councillor McCormack, sorry, and then Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. McPhee, for your report. I would like just to home in on two areas, 6.1 libraries and 6.2 heritage service. The last time that we had a report before us on libraries, my memory says to me that we were 6 members of staff down and we had only 1.5 qualified librarians. Now, I'm clearly not happy about that, and I know that there are lots of reasons why that might happen, but I'm wondering, my first question is, have we managed to enhance that situation in any way since February? Because I certainly believe that we should. This is a very important area of support for our communities in so many different ways. Libraries are not just libraries anymore, they're very much more than that. And all the support that they offer communities is something that we should try and keep at the highest possible level. And the second point, my second question, relates to heritage service. I know that, again, the heritage service has been taken down to a very low level. I think, I'm not quite sure, but I think that the number is 3 permanent members of staff, and the rest of the posts are filled on a part-time temporary basis. That is not a good basis on which to go forward. I don't think, again, the heritage service is becoming more and more used by local people, more and more interest in the heritage service. I see that myself. I visit Museum in Eilean fairly regularly, and I know it because of my work with Stornoway Historical Society. And you did make some reference to the Great Place project, Mr. McPhee. I thought that was a very good report, and I was very sorry that we weren't able to hold on to the member of staff and allow that individual to take matters forward. I'm not quite clear on how this has been taken forward, but it's such an important report. I really believe myself that it ought to be taken forward by a group of people, to look after it as we would as councillors. But there really should be, I think, a designated individual taking it forward. Is so important. I do understand the issues around lack of resources. I appreciate that, but I think these areas must have resource. Otherwise, we're going to lose out significantly in providing these services for the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McCrum. Just in terms of the Great Place project, at the very heart of that project and bringing it forward is going to be the network of Comhairle and the Historical Society as well. And in terms of the libraries, that is now the remit of Communities and Housing. I've just been reminded by the director, but I'm sure Mr. McPhee can. It's okay. Education.
Yeah.
But I'm sure Mr. McPhee can give us an update.
I had forgotten that. I should remember that.
Well, I should as well. Mr. McPhee.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yes, as you've said, the libraries is now a matter for Education, Skills and Children's Services as of the 1st of July. However, we continue to support that transition, and just as a reminder for Councillor McCormick and the members, Kathleen and the team are working on a forward plan for the library service, and they're aiming to bring something to the members, I think, to the December series, if that's possible. So very much a live issue, and it will be great to see a forward plan, which I hope will deal with some of the resourcing issues that team has. In terms of heritage, the structure remains a priority. The development of a forward plan for the Heritage Service is still an outstanding action, and we're going to audit and scrutiny on that matter next week. The Great Place strategy provides an overarching strategy and framework for the wider sector, and we have had discussions about resourcing, and there's, I think, a strong commitment to look at resourcing the delivery of the Great Place project, and we've had very good early discussions with HIE and Lottery Heritage Fund to that end. Similarly, resourcing the Heritage Forum, who have been central to the development of the Great Place project and other heritage activity. So that there's a commitment to look at how we can resource the Heritage Forum. In addition to that, you'll note from the update that the Heritage team have been quite involved in the Community Renewal Fund. There are a significant number of projects under the Community Renewal Fund, which, subject to approval of that funding, and some movement on timescales of use of the funding, I think will support the development of further heritage activity in the sector, particularly in relation to looking at ways in which we can develop our museum storage facilities, both north and south. In addition to that, the Levelling Up Fund bids that have been prioritised are effectively all heritage-related activity. And the proposal is to look at presenting a single heritage bid across the Outer Hebrides to take advantage of the opportunities around Levelling Up Fund. So just to thank Councillor McCormick for these comments, I think we're all committed to making sure that heritage and heritage-related activities are prioritised over the next period if we can resource them accordingly. So,
thank you, Mr. McPhee. Councillor Robertson.
May I have just one quick follow-up?
Very quickly.
When you say, Mr. McPhee, resources, do you mean human beings who are actually going to work in these posts?
Yes, yes. Sorry, I suppose one drifts into language, but ultimately you need people to take these projects forward.
Thank you, Chair. Well, most of what I was going to say on heritage has been said, I think, but there is a very strong heritage forum at the moment, Angus, and it's helped a lot by the Heritage Service itself. It's working very well, and there is a representative from Stornoway Historical Society on it. I forgot the name, but it is working well. But you know, you make some very good points on that particular issue. I was going to come back to, and Joe mentioned it, and if Joe was lucky enough to be listening to the interesting Transportation Committee this morning and the lengthy discussion on tourism infrastructure, I note what you're saying here in terms of getting work done by a consultant, Joe, and I think this is quite urgent, listening to what members had to say this morning. Can you expand a bit more on how that's going to progress, though?
Before he does, I mentioned myself the Rural Tourism Fund too, and the plans to try to develop a strategy over the next few years. That could include addressing some of the issues raised this morning.
Yeah.
Joe.
Yes, thanks, Chair. We've been awarded 30,000. We've prepared a brief for undertaking that activity based on the terms of the funding that has been approved and based on the terms of the RTIF itself. Unfortunately, the first time we put this out for consultants, we had no interest from the tendering process. So we need to go back out with that very shortly. I don't know if Murdo is actually on a line. I don't think he is. Murdo has probably more of the actual detail as he's leading the activity, but it may be that rather than putting it out widely, that we have to look at speaking to some specific consultancies who have the experience and the skills and the knowledge to support this activity and try and encourage them to respond to the opportunity. But it is a huge opportunity, and I will now listen to Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and pick up the discussions there in relation to I think camper vans amongst other things from I believe. So very happy to do that, but that's the process we're going to follow with this.
You won't be happy by the end of it. It's five hours you'll never get back.
I would counsel against it, Mr. McPhee.
Can I ask Joe, I mean, we've had some unsuccessful applications to RTIF. Have you been given any kind of feedback as to why they were unsuccessful?
I think we were successful with round one. We got a significant chunk of the funding. We were unsuccessful with rounds 2 and 3, and I think, from what we understand, largely due to limitations on the available budget. I think the move to a more strategic approach rather than just round by round or project by project, I think, is welcome. And it allows us to look a little bit closer at those areas where of particular, well, there are particular issues around our tourism infrastructure. It also complements, it's an opportunity to complement the work that's going on under the Islands Deal, the Destination Development theme. And there are significant capital investments proposed under the Islands Deal, amounting to some 36 million of capital projects of the 5 projects. So there's certainly complementary activity there. So I think we've got to really try to prioritise now this next phase of that plan. There is probably detailed feedback on the individual projects, but I think overall, I think that's the sort of thrust of the feedback.
Thank you. anything, Mr. Biella? Okay, then thanks for that. The recommendations, and so far as this committee's interests are concerned, are for noting.
Chairman.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Mackenzie, yes?
Yeah, sorry, my machine seems to be cutting out from time to time, but I think I caught the main part of that last discussion where Mr. McCormick raised, the very important point about the shortage of staff in both the museum and the library. And I think Joe mentioned something about that one person from the Historical Society was either, I don't know, is it on the board or whatever. But I wonder, and this may already been done, or maybe it can't be done, but it's just a suggestion, which has probably been done before or made before, that there could be a closer link. I know there are Comhairle and others too, but with the Astronomy Historical Society and the museum, and maybe a closer link in the sense that to the mutual benefit, because obviously at this present time, not in respect of taking the place of staff, which we hope will be reappointed, but just to do a sort of they're not professionals, but they're very good professional amateurs, if you could call them that, and are involved on a virtual and daily basis. So for the mutual benefit, maybe even funds for the Historical Society and Comhairle, and it would result in help for the museum in particular. It's just a suggestion, and maybe it's been done.
Yeah, that link already exists, but I'll let Joe quickly address that question.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, we have a strong link with the Historical Society. We provide funding directly to the Historical Society for their activities, and collaborate on a number of projects directly. But yeah, I mean, I think we want to collaborate with as many of the Comhairle as possible, but it's sometimes it's just down to actual physical resource to do that. But on a project by project basis, very good links and very good relationship.
Thanks very much. The report is for noting. We're moving now on to the next performance management report, and it's for noting again and provides an overview of the community's directed business plan and related performance at Q1. The area of relevance for this committee is the section on energy at paragraphs 6.2 to 6.24 of the report, and the Director will speak to the report.
Thanks, Chair. As you said, the elements relevant to this committee are energy, and I think John Cunningham provided that overview in detail in his reports earlier. So I don't propose to say anything additional, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, Mr. McCormick?
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. It's a very helpful report here at item 6. The Director will know that SSC have been engaging with the public as to their future plans for developments and whatnot, and in particular they had a section on the Highlands and Islands, which I responded to myself. My particular interest was in the replacement of the Skye interconnector, and also the possibility that a second interconnector would be laid down. And Chair, that Ofgem were very keen that should happen. They actually encouraged SSE to do that. And so far, they haven't done that. But if you look in that report that SSE have produced, there were two aspects to it that struck me as important to us. First of all, the initial part of the report projected the idea that they wanted to be much more community focused, that they wanted to be much more friendly and working with communities and developing things with communities. And then further on, there was a table which indicated all the kind of suggested links that they had proposed for the future. And what astonished me was the number of double links, like the one that I have been advocating for Lewis to Skye. There is going to be a double link to Uist, for example, in future. That's their proposal. And throughout the Highlands and Islands, there were a number of references to similar double links. And so what I cannot understand is why they weren't so keen on having the double link to Skye. Did we, I mean, I know that at some point we did make some reference, but did we respond to that consultation document? And have you any idea what the reaction might be?
Yes, Chair, we try to respond to all these consultation documents, and we do speak on a regular basis to SSE. In fact, we try and catch up with them at least once a month to go through a range of these issues. So that document you referred to, and what they're referring to is ED2, the next price control round. And within that document, they're saying they're putting forward ideas for consideration. So I've seen it reported that they have proposing 2 links to Uist, for example. Well, that's not quite right. They are saying that they will give consideration in the next price control round to the potential of another Uist link. They've also assured us that they are willing in the next price control round to look at a second parallel Skye-Harris link as well. So, there's a consultation document, and it's up to all the consultees to put in ideas for the next price control round. So some of these ideas were already in the consultation document, and I would anticipate some of these ideas remaining, some dropping out, and some potential new ones coming into the final document that they will take forward to Ofgem. It is, of course, up to Ofgem to decide, dictate what they can or cannot do in the next round. Ofgem will always take a position that is up to the transmission owner and say, well, we're neutral, or we're positive, or we're negative. But they will not say no. They will just say it's up to the transmission owner, and then they will leave that to SSE to develop and take forward. So I think that's where we are. Consultation responses in. They will work up the document, and we'll see what goes forward in their submission to Ofgem in due course.
Thank you very much. I mean, I've actually had this conversation with Ofgem through the Poverty Action Group. We were discussing prices and whatnot, but they widened it out and were prepared to discuss anything at all, basically. And quite to my astonishment, the lead officer who was there said that they had actually said to Ofgem, why don't you build 2 cables at the same time? Which would suggest to me that if SSE put it into their programme, Ofgem will accept it. Do we know, is there any way we can put pressure on, I suppose what I'm asking, to make sure that SSE put it into their programme?
Yeah, well, Chair, we keep engaging with Ofgem and making the case to them. Now, we don't have any particular tools, to make them put it in. The reason they didn't put it through, they didn't go forward with it at the time of the replacement cable, was they got approval for the replacement cable through emergency powers with Ofgem. So if the cable hadn't failed, if that replacement would have gone into the next price control round as well. And so maybe potentially in that price control round, they will have an additional cable. So we pressurise them, we make the case to them, but we wait to see what they take forward. If the committee is happy, we can formally write to them again, Chair, making that point. But like I say, every time we meet them, every month or so, we do make the point to them for the next price control round, both for the Skye-Harris and the Uist cables.
So that dialogue is in place anyway to
Thank you, Chair.
Communicate with them. Thank you. So, insofar as this committee's interests are concerned, the report is for noting. Do you want to have a 10-minute break, or do you want to fire on? Well, it's a quarter. This must be the longest meeting we've had. Okay, item 7 is the Ofgem consultation. A significant code review on access and forward-looking charges. The report seeks homologation of a code response to an Ofgem consultation on the code review on access and forward-looking charges. The consultation opened in June, 30th of June, and closed on 26th of August, which is out with the code cycle, of course. So I'm sure that members will agree that is a good and strong response to these proposals, and I will ask John Cunningham to update us and speak to the report, the response to the consultation.
Thanks, Chair. There are quite grave implications here for our community generators, present and future, because Ofgem are proposing to impose transmission charges on any generator who uses any part of the transmission system, whether they're connected at distribution or at transmission level. Now, in an ideal world, our community generators would want to generate electricity to supply local consumers on the island. But because of the way the UK electricity network is configured, they're forced to export that energy off the island through the transmission system in the form of PPA, and then islanders have to buy back their electricity from SSE at a vastly inflated premium. So it's a case of our community generators are using that system because they have to rather than because they want to. So we're asking Ofgem, could we have a 10 megawatt exemption just to cover the community generators to make sure they're not penalised, because the whole of the sport infrastructure between the islands and the mainland, it's quite a substantial commitment, and it could be ruinous, certainly for new community generation. But happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, John. I mean, while Ofgem are independent, I think it's important perhaps that we get that message across about the exemption at a political level as well.
Yeah.
So your agreement, we'll pursue that.
Yeah.
Any questions? Sorry,
I just wanted to say, Chair, that I'm very pleased with this report from Mr. Cunningham. Thank you very much for that. I think it could make a huge difference to community generators if we could get Ofgem to agree this. It's certainly an issue that I raised with them too when I met with them, and it would be good if they would. The whole business of community generation throughout the United Kingdom is not appropriately recognised. I do not think. But this would be a step in the right direction.
Okay, thank you very much. Recommendations are 3.1 there for your agreement. Item 8 is fisheries, the Marine Scotland funding scheme for the first-time vessel owners and bridging funding. This scheme was reported at the last series of the code and welcomes this very positive development to assist new entrants looking into first-time vessel ownership. The report seeks further assistance from the Code to deliver the scheme in terms of providing a short-term bridging loan support, given that the importance of FIS funding towards these projects. The report also proposes 250k of Crown Estate generated funding to be used to increase the balance of the revolving loan fund to accommodate future demand for investment in fisheries. And given the financial implications, the recommendation will be going to Policy and Resources next week as well. But we're seeking support for these proposals at the Service Committee as well. So, Joe, can you give a brief summary of the report, please?
Yes, thanks, Chair. As you've said, a highly successful fisheries investment scheme. We've invested significantly over the last 3 years, nearly £750 million in projects of over £4 million. We welcomed the new Marine Scotland Grant Fund in June. However, as I've outlined in paragraph 7.4 of the report, there is an issue arising with the grant assistance, which can only be claimed once the vessel purchase has taken place. So therefore, there's a requirement for bridging funding to be put in place. The Royal Bank will not undertake this or provide this facility, and neither will anybody else. So we are seeking approval for the Comhairle to offer this bridging support to fisheries investment scheme cases. Bear in mind that the bridging will be provided against approved funding. So the level of risk should be minimal to the Comhairle. In addition, of course, we always take security over the particular assets as part of our own fisheries investment scheme conditions. We've also included in the report here just an idea of the level of demand for fisheries investment scheme cases, which continues to be very welcome, and we would like consideration of adding to the revolving loan fund from any potential Crown Estate funds for 21-22, subject to that funding, of course, being announced and approved. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McPhee. I think it's a very appropriate use of Crown Estate funding. And I think, if I recall correctly, Mr. McNeill, Ian McNeill, raised the prospect of using Crown Estate to support the industry at a previous series. So, any questions or comments? Councillor MacLeod, Chair of the Joint Consultative Committee on Fisheries. Good to hear from you.
Are you finished? Can I start?
Yes.
No, I totally support this, and it's a very small sum of money, 250,000, and the Crown Estate funding basically comes from the sea, so it's a small return for a big investment. I mean, this fishery scheme has been excellent over many, many years. It's energised the fishing community, it supported young entrants. There's only one problem on the horizon. There's plenty of fish, there's plenty of shellfish, there's plenty of enthusiastic fishermen. But what we're faced now is a threat from the SNP Green Alliance, because we know what the green agenda is. It's certainly not pro-fishing. So I totally support this if we want to sustain and maintain our fishing industry in the Western Isles.
Thank you, Mr. McLeod. Any other contributions at this stage?
Can I just clarify, Chair, that
Leader,
that I'm sure Councillor MacLeod didn't mean a small return from a big investment.
Yes. Thank you. So, insofar as this committee's interest is concerned, the recommendation 3.1 for your agreement. Item 9 is planning on the Outer Hebrides Local Development Plan. It's supplementary guidance for caravans, huts and temporary buildings. The report was before you in the June series, and following a statutory consultation period is now before you for approval to adopt the finalised guidance as part of the statutory Outer Hebrides Local Development Plan. And the guidance is appended to the report. Susan is here. Isla and Mary are here actually to answer any specific points you may have.
I'll let Isla lead on the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Isla, you're mute. We're not hearing you.
Mute.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
good. Thanks. Good afternoon. This report presents the finalised supplementary guidance for caravans, huts and temporary buildings for adoption. The Comhairle approved the draft supplementary guidance for consultation in June of this year, and a public and stakeholder consultation was carried out over the summer. A total of 5 consultation responses were received, and these were mainly minor in nature, largely relating to clarity of wording, links to further sources of information, or matters out with the scope of the document. The responses to the comments received are summarised in section 6 of the covering report. So no significant modifications have thus been made to the supplementary guidance as presented at the June committee. And subject to approval, this guidance will be submitted to Scottish ministers for a period of notice of adoption. Once adopted, the guidance will become an integral part of the Comhairle statutory development plan and will supersede the existing 2018 supplementary guidance. And myself and Mary are happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Isla. Any questions from members? If not, recommendations 3.1 for your agreement. Thanks very much, both of you. Item 10 we've covered earlier, and then we're on to item 11, performance monitoring reports outstanding, and that report is for noting. Thank you. The next scheduled meeting of the committee will be on the 2nd of December. So thanks very much, those of you who attended, both in the chamber and online, and have a good afternoon and thank you.